المثاني وبقرآن معظم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع ربوا بالسبع المثاني وبقرآن معظم ربوا بالسبع المثاني وبقرآن معظم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع الغم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع الغم أنت يا ربي أماني إن دجى الكرب وأظلم أنت يا ربي أماني إن دجى الكرب وأظلم وإذا الخطب دهاني أنت بي يا ربي أرحم وإذا الخطب دهاني أنت بي يا ربي أرحم ربوا بالسبع المثاني وبقرآن معظم ربوا بالسبع المثاني وبقرآن معظم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع الغم أصلح اللهم شاني واكشف الهم مع الغم عاذلي فيما دهاني وهو باللذات ينعم عاذلي فيما دهاني وهو باللذات ينعم لو يعاني ما أعاني أسبل الدمع مع
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Today's live, brothers and sisters, may be very unique for a lot of you. It is always an experience for us. Sometimes actually it overwhelms us that when we bring brothers and sisters who are not just people who talk, but they talk and they walk the walk. People who are examples for us, for our youth, of course for the Muslims. Live examples that people should seek to follow. People who did not just seek knowledge and became more knowledgeable, nothing more. SubhanAllah. We have today a dear brother, someone I haven't met but yearned to meet for a long, long time. SubhanAllah. This is also for me a dua coming true. to be able to discuss and interview such caliber brothers, yani to this level. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Wallah. So we have today Brother Moazzam Begg. Many of you know him. Anyone who's following what's happening page, or followed what happened after War on Terror, what happened after Guantanamo, with all of the what was happening to the brothers there. And so we have our brother Moazzam Begg, who is now he's the outreach director at Page, London-based advocacy group which aids those whose lives have personally been impacted by the war on terror. He was someone whose life was also impacted, as you know. The brother himself spent time in Guantanamo. In 2002, Brother Begg was imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay after being detained in Pakistan. He was released several years later, and today he's speaker and an advocate and an author. Basically, he's a mouthpiece, he's a speaker for the oppressed. Many brothers and sisters don't have people when they get in situations. They don't know who to talk to, who to call, who to get help from, especially brothers who are active in Islamic da'wah, humanitarian work, and others. I myself, when I was being questioned in UAE, for instance, one of the main organizations that came to mind was Cage, and we actually got in touch with brothers from Cage, and they actually kind of helped us how to maneuver in the kind of questioning that was happening in UAE. With all of that, brothers and sisters, I would like to welcome our brother Moazzam Begg.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam,
And
Shaykh.
it's my pleasure and honor to be here, alhamdulillah, to be speaking to you all this distance and this massive time gap between us. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite us on all that is good and keep us away from that which isn't, and make this gathering a great benefit for all of us.
I mean, akhi. Wallah. But first of all, Shaykh, again, it is an honor. Brother Begg, wallahi, it was always my intention to put together some type of a platform where we can speak to heroes of this deen. And I know you're not going to accept that, but it was really to create a platform where Muslim youth, Muslims in general, can have access to hear the real stories directly from those who have been through it. Sheikh, tell me, what makes you who you are, Sheikh? Yani, with all of what you have been through, yani, subhanallah, what is it that, yani, if from the deen, what is it that you have to do? You have to do the things that you have done in life.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. That's a big question because I'm really nobody, and whatever I do is minuscule in comparison to many people who have given so much for this deen, past and present. So I don't really count myself amongst them because I know them. I know a lot of such people. Even my time in Guantanamo is minuscule compared to some brothers. Some of my closest friends have spent 14, 15, 16, 20 years in Guantanamo. And what I've gone through is incomparable. And they have also been on the path that I've been, but have done more, much, much more. So in answer to your question, I can only look at those who are far above me, of which there are many, and what they have done, what they have sacrificed, what they have given for this deen, and how they are role models that we don't hear about. And that's one of the things I think that all of this is that we don't know about these. Why don't in the West, they celebrate people who struggled for their beliefs. Nelson Mandela is one of the most famous prisoners in the world, who was convicted as a terrorist and was in prison for 27 years. The world knows him. And I wish that our community at least knew our prisoners and the sacrifices that they have made, so that they too can celebrate them and give them as examples for our youth and future generations.
Who was there? I mean, subhanAllah, what kind? I mean, you spent, I think you were there for a year. How many years? Or how much
I was
time
held for 3 years.
3 years.
I spent 3 years in US. 3 years, yes.
Sheikh, there's so much to, we were also talking to, I don't know, I'm sure you know Brother Mansoor, who was there for 14 years. We had a whole conversation.
He worked
Yeah, and we read his book. We brought him on the show. We had two, I think he spoke to you about this, I'm sure. But Sheikh, yes. What kind of people were there? Who was there? And why should we know about them?
There's all kinds of people in Guantanamo. There's young, there's old, there's black, there's white, there's every continent, people from 40 different nations. The eldest person there was about 80 years old. The youngest was 13. In between that, you have, to give you an example, just as diverse as the Ummah is, that's how diverse the prisoners were. There are brothers from Chad, from Belgium, from Australia, from Canada, from East Turkestan in China, from Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Maldive Islands. You name the place, there's a brother representative of that place. And that's why one of the things that I say is that although they say it's a war on terrorism, Muslims are not the only people in the world that do terrorism. As we know, there are far right, far left, Tamil Tigers, there's a whole load of them. But this was a war on Muslims because the first condition to be a prisoner in Guantanamo is that you must be a Muslim. That's why there are no non-Muslims detained without charge or trial in Guantanamo. And this, for America, is a bipartisan vision. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, they see it in the same way, that this is a place for Muslims. And although the number has now dwindled down to 35, that's still 35 prisoners too many. And unfortunately, the United States and the governments that worked alongside it have jettisoned their entire belief in the rule of law. And because of the naming of, oh, they're Muslims, therefore it's okay, we can get away with this. That's exactly what happened. They've got away with it, and nobody holding them to account.
Sheikh, why do you think the Muslims with such huge populations, why can't we take them accountable? I mean, why is it because we don't know, we don't care? Is it that we have no idea about the struggles of the Muslims? Why? What is it that you think makes the Muslims so easygoing on these matters?
My brother Sheikh Muhammad, I think, one thing is really important. The United States of America didn't do this alone. It asked for partners. It said George Bush said after the 9/11 attacks that you are either with us or with the terrorists. There's no in between. There's no Switzerland in this war. In this war, there is no gray area. You are either black or white. So majority of the countries that handed people over to America, unfortunately and sadly and shamefully for us as Muslims, were Muslim countries, the majority. So you had Muslim countries that many of us visit, sometimes for holidays. And if I was to name them all, I'd be sitting here, for quite some time naming every single country. But they all took part. Either their soil was used to torture the prisoners, or they were held there indefinitely without charge and then handed to America, or they were used as places of outsourcing of the torture, where the Americans would send people to places like Syria and Egypt and Libya to be tortured, then to give the false confessions, and then to be sent to different places or to remain where they were. So unfortunately, the Muslims, I would say, the Muslim nations, not the people, the leaderships, have been the biggest culprits in all of this. And I think that that's one of the things, that's why the Muslims as a whole are incapable of doing anything about this, because our governments are fully complicit. Pakistan, as a country where I originate from, they handed over, including me, from my own house in front of my wife and children, they handed over 1,000 people without any legal process for bounty money to the United States. So that tells you everything you need to know about the rule of law, about Islam, about rights, about security. And that still has not been, every Muslim country could have said, sorry, America, we are a country of rules and laws and regulations. Give us evidence against each person and we will deal with them accordingly. But we will not be handing people, our citizens and other citizens, over to you because you are the world's policeman. We will not do that because that is against international law. And nobody did that.
Pakistan, for instance, what happened? What were the charges that were put against you in Pakistan? Well, actually, I don't even. That's not even what I'm trying to figure out. Is that, look, from Afghanistan, what was happening in Afghanistan? How did this whole thing come? How did this happen? Where somebody ends up in Pakistan,
So,
somebody
yes, yes. So for me, I was in there 2000, 2001, particularly. I was there with my wife and children, 3 young children, my wife, and we were living there. It was the time of the Taliban; they were in power, and we were working on a project to build a school. We built the school for girls and boys separately, and some aid projects for wells, to build wells, because there was a drought, especially in the region up in the north towards Herat and that side.
Mm.
So we were involved in building wells, and we had that project up and running and was running well, alhamdulillah. But then, of course, the 9/11 attacks happened, and several weeks after that, the US started to fire cruise missiles. And I was there. I was in Kabul when the cruise missiles landed.
Mm.
All the windows of my house broke. In the entire road, the whole street, you heard the sounds of the smashing glass simultaneously. And after they started to fire the cruise missiles, this was shortly before, then they started to drop what's known as daisy cutter bombs. Now, a daisy cutter sounds like a lawnmower, but it's not. It's the heaviest bomb in conventional warfare. It weighs 15 tons, 15,000-pound bomb. And they were dropping them across different front lines and different areas of Taliban. And it was under this that I evacuated with my family and
Allah.
thousands of others. So hundreds and hundreds of people being killed, people trying to get out. And so it was chaos.
So
So
they didn't even care
my
who they
family,
were killing. They were just dropping bombs. It didn't. It
it was
wasn't.
vengeance. Yeah. What happened to America was terrible. Of course, there's no doubt about what happened, that 9/11 was a terrible thing. But everybody wasn't responsible. That's not justice, to kill people who have nothing to do with it. And that's what was going on. This wasn't vengeance, or this wasn't justice. This was vengeance. And vengeance was anybody that's there, will kill them. And brother, the thing is that, as I said, we know the number. How many people died in 9/11? 2,976. I know that number. How many people died in Afghanistan? How many people died in Iraq as a result of Afghanistan, which I'll explain to you later? The most conservative figures say 900,000. That's the
Allah.
equivalent of 500 9/11s. 500 9/11s. So eventually I got to Pakistan. I took up residence in Pakistan, which is where my family's from originally anyway. And I spent there about 3 months, helping refugees, helping people evacuate. And then it was on the night of the 31st of January, there was a knock on my door. I opened the door. There's a group of people there. One of them puts a gun to my head. No uniforms, no identification, nothing. They
These
threw
were
me to the floor.
Pakistanis. These were Americans. Who were they?
They were Pakistanis, but
Mm.
there were Americans in the back.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what happened. So they tied my hands behind my back, and they put a hood over my head, they shackled my legs, put me onto the floor, carried me, literally. And my wife and my children were literally in the next room. And then they carried me into the back of this vehicle. In the back of this vehicle, there are 2 men sitting at the front, dressed like Pakistanis, but not looking like Pakistanis at all. They're very white,
Mm.
reddish complexion. And they lift the hood off my head, and I can see them now. And they say, you can answer our questions here or in Guantanamo Bay.
Mm.
And then one of them, he produces a pair of handcuffs, and he says, this was given me by the wife of my friend who was killed on 9/11,
Mm.
to go and catch the person who did it. And he put those cuffs on my hands, which were cuffed behind my back. And I said to him, wouldn't she think you're a really stupid person for catching the wrong people? So this was the kind of level of
Let me ask you this: how, in that circumstance, you still answered that way? I mean, how,
because
how
because
there's something special about brothers like you. I've met brothers who do the right thing and say the right thing. I mean, you mentally, were you always like this, or that allowed you
I
to be
was
in places like this, and work in places like this?
I, so my background, I mean, I was scared. Of course, I was terrified. Of course, I was terrified. I was more terrified for my family than for myself,
What
because
was it?
I still didn't know who these people were. I had a sense, but they didn't come in any legal way. They
Mm.
didn't come with any warrant. They didn't come with any identification. Nobody was telling me who they were. But to answer your question, I had been in war zones before. I'd been in Bosnia during the
Mm.
war in Bosnia,
Mhm.
when the Muslims of Bosnia, there was a genocide against them and they were being massacred, and
You
there
were
were
in Herzegovina.
Muslim.
Where were you?
I
In
was in a
Sarajevo.
city called, uh, I was in Zenica, in Jablanica, and it's this particular town where I worked, called Ostrazat.
Uh,
So I went to all of these places. I was around all those, Travnik, Zenica, and these areas. And I remained there. I mean, I even joined the fallen volunteer force of the Armia Bosanska for a
yeah,
short
because these
while,
were hard hit
because
areas, Sheikh.
people were getting killed en masse. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
the
know. No, I
biggest
remember.
genocide. It was the biggest genocide in Europe after the Holocaust in World War II.
Subhanallah.
That's what was. This is how immense it was, and it happened to Europe's indigenous, white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Slavic population. So being white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed didn't save them. It didn't save them. And this is important because this is all before the war on terror, before
Yes.
even the term Islamophobia. A genocide was happening to Europe's Muslims before the term Islamophobia even was invented. So it tells you the extent to which, animosity and hatred towards Muslims has been building up throughout the world, let alone, as I said, the war on terror. So I had experienced this, and I had some idea of how to deal with a difficult situation. I grew up here in Birmingham, when we were a minority, Asian Muslims and Asians, and we used to have running battles with neo Nazis. I
Yeah,
mean,
I read that.
literally,
I read that you were.
yeah. And see, and we used to go to school sometimes on the way. There'd be neo Nazis on the way, and we had to fight them. It's either you fight them or you run away, one of the two. And there's a point at which we stopped running away. No more running. And that's what kind of built my kind of background a little bit.
So Bosnia. Then you after Bosnia, where were you, Sheikh?
So after Bosnia, I was here in the UK.
Sheikh, I don't want to
I
sound like I'm interrogating you because
No,
that's
no,
what they
not
do
at
to
all.
me
Not at
when I
all.
get back from these places, the airports. Where have you
Yeah,
been?
I
Where did
know.
you work?
I know.
So please don't mind. I want
Yeah, yeah.
people
No,
to know your background. I want people to know
no.
what it
Of
takes to
course.
work.
I mean, my background is my parents originally from India. They migrated to Pakistan. They're Muhajirin, and then they moved here to Pakistan. I was born and raised here in the UK. I went to a Jewish primary school as a child, because my father. There weren't any Islamic schools, and because my father thought they don't have really any shirk amongst them, and their food is kosher and halal for us to eat. So it was like a practical decision, and so that was part of my growing up. Um, so as a result, there was no, even growing up in the UK, there was no concept of Christmas because I went to a Jewish school, and they're,
Ah,
they're kind of more opposed to Christmas than we are.
yeah, subhanallah. Another
um,
irony. But hey,
yeah. So there was all of this, and as I said, I studied law, when I left, school, and then shortly afterwards went to Bosnia repeatedly, and I went
mm,
during my discovery of Islam. I wasn't always practicing. I started practicing when I was about 24, 25. And I became practicing because of Bosnia. That was the reason. And the reason was because I had no idea that there were white European Muslims. I had no idea, indigenous population. I just thought that there's Arabs and Asians and that's it. I had no idea at all. And it became, I saw these people were being literally butchered, raped, and murdered. When I looked at them, they looked very European. Even their practice of Islam was different to ours.
yeah,
But I thought that they're getting killed just because they say La ilaha illallah. That's it. Some
yeah,
of them don't even pray.
yeah. They're
They
drinking.
drink
They're
alcohol and all that.
yeah,
They're getting killed just for that.
for that only.
So,
Something for the
yeah.
Muslims to
Only.
realize, even till today.
Yeah.
You're not realizing.
Yeah.
The things, Sheikh, before we go on to this, there's a lot of integration things. There's a lot of push for, and is there a lesson for the Muslims of the West and what happened in Bosnia?
Yeah, subhanallah. Look, the lesson I see, I even take the lesson from the Jewish community, to be honest with you. Because
Mm,
if you go to those areas in Poland, in Germany, and so forth, they still have them preserved, the Jewish areas where they have a distinct language, Hebrew.
yeah,
They have a distinct dress. The men have beards, the women cover their hair. They have prayers. They have separate, cemeteries. they have synagogues, and they are separate. And because of that, they were targeted by the Nazis. Because of that. The difference with us is that they at least were the same color. The majority of us are not. So that's an extra layer. And on top of that, Islamophobia has permeated society. It's in China against the Uyghurs. It's in India against the Indian Muslims. It's in France. It's in Britain. It's in America. It's everywhere. It's across the board. And it's in some places it's worse than others. In Britain and America, it's not as bad as it is in China. But nonetheless, the lesson for us is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test you. He's going to test you. He tested people greater than you. He tested all of his prophets and all the Sahaba. And he mentions again and again and again in the Quran, again and again the Quran mentions it. So if we think we're not going to be tested, there's something wrong with our faith. Something deeply wrong. And we've got to be prepared for it. We have to be prepared for that sacrifice, whether it's through our wealth, whether it's through our life, whether it's through our freedom, whether it's through our family. All those things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. All of these things is part of what we're going to have to expect. So the lesson for us is, the lesson for me from Bosnia was, yeah, that could happen anywhere. It could happen anywhere. And what spiritual, physical, moral preparation are we making? And I think that most of us are complacent. Not because I think we live in societies where everybody's terrible. Inshallah, all of you are safe and all of us are safe here. But it's because we haven't internalized the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who says that if you think that you're going to go to Jannah without being tested, you haven't understood this religion at all.
Sheikh, so when you were in Bosnia, for instance, the Muslims there, what? So in some ways, they were caught in a situation where you're saying we could get caught up in again.
It's possible. Of course it's possible. Yes, it is. So, and we've seen different manifestations of that. Yeah.
What were you going through in your mind, saying, how come they didn't see this coming? How come they didn't prepare? How come? Was there something in your mind saying, why are you in this situation? You see what I'm saying? It almost reminds me of the ayah, like Allah, like the malaika will say to the people when they are being thrown in Jahannam, afwaja, didn't you get another? Did you not get somebody that came to warn you? How in the world did you end up here?
Really, really good. It's one of the best questions I've had about this, because it means that people are thinking, means you're thinking about this, right? I want to give you a little story. A young man, his name was Samir. I never forgot him to this day. He came to the UK and we're sitting talking. He's a refugee from Bosnia. As we're talking, he's talking about how he was close to the Serbs, the Christian Serbs. Under communism, the religion really didn't manifest itself much. So everybody knew that you're a Croat, you're a Serb, you're a Bosnian or a Bosniak. But religion really didn't come into it. It wasn't a divide based on religion. And as he's talking to me, Sheikh Muhammad, he rolls up his leg, his trouser leg, and he pulls it off.
Ya Allah.
He pulls his leg off. Meaning he has a prosthetic leg.
Yeah.
And we're talking, he's talking, and he's saying, I stepped on a landmine that was laid by my neighbor that I'd known for years.
Allah.
And as he's talking to me, he rolls up his other trouser leg. He rolls up his other trouser leg and he pulls that leg off too. He's a double amputee. And he was a graduate of Sarajevo University, very educated. He told me, he said, if I could, I would go back to fight to defend my people. He said, those people who we thought were our friends, they turned on us. And they turned on us in the name of us being the descendants of those who accepted Islam at the time of the Uthmani Khilafah. And this, they say, is their vengeance against the Ottoman Turks. And they call us Ottomans. So
in India, they call us Turkulu. This is very famous. They say Turkulu.
Yes, that's right. Yes, they do still Turkulu. Yeah. And so it's still very, it's in the a kind of a collective memory of people. Maybe ordinary Serbs don't know about this, but there are people who are they're thinkers of, especially of the far right nationalist type. Brother, I want to just want you to think about this because this is really really important. Do you remember when the guy walked into Brenton Tarrant? He walked into the masajid in New Zealand and killed all those people.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know that on his guns he had written different battles against the Muslims throughout history?
Yes.
But really,
I saw the picture of it.
Most people don't know that he was actually listening to songs. He had headphones on. He's listening to songs. You know what songs he's listening to? He's listening to songs that celebrate and praise Radovan Karadzic. Radovan Karadzic was the leader of the Bosnian Serbs, a convicted war criminal. And so he's celebrating, and there's a white far right nationalist celebrating the killing of white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Muslims. You see? So this racism isn't just about race. It's about faith. Otherwise, this white man wouldn't be celebrating the death of white people. And so just so that you understand the connection to all of this, that happened recently. Bosnia happened 30 odd years ago, but there's still resonance in the minds of even the enemies of Muslims.
Brother Moazzam, have you ever thought about? I mean, I know you do mass lectures. I'm sure. I mean, we've heard your lectures all over and writing and all this. But you know, we still. Let me ask you this. You know, what what difference do you see from being out there in, let's say, in England and the Muslims of the U.S.? Because for some reason, I think we are even more in a slumber than you guys are. I mean, not that you are, but I see the Muslims of England and UK they're very straight. They're very much more observant and I think historically connected. And
I mean, I remember being told when I was learning Islam is that the further you get away from the heart of Islam, the further you get away from the center and the heart of Islam, the more distant you become from its principles.
Yes.
And that's clear. Even in India, so for example, you can see when so many practices that are from alien to Islam, from Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism, then start to permeate. I think we would be unwise to ourselves to say that this doesn't happen even in our time today. The further people get and drawn into a society, the more they become part of that society and start to argue Islamically that it's okay to be like this. In Britain, we're not immune from this at all. It's just because I think we have a larger concentration and we're a little bit closer to the heart of Islam. But there is a difference. Of course, there's a difference. The American Muslims, no doubt, were terrified and traumatized by the response of the United States as a country to 9/11.
Yeah, of course.
The only country in the world that's done something called a Muslim ban, even though, as I said, Guantanamo. How could Guantanamo as a thing be held anywhere in the world, let alone by the most powerful and vociferous advocate of human rights and democracy and freedom? That doesn't make sense, does it? You could understand a Guantanamo being in Russia. You could understand it being in China, and they have their versions. But America, it doesn't make sense. So I think for American Muslims, their message was, well, they can do that. Imagine what they're going to do to us. And there's been a whole series of laws passed in America, the Patriot Act and beyond. And as you said, even getting targeted every time you travel, for humanitarian work. This is a law. You have no right to silence there. I don't know how it is in America, but if they stop you when you're coming back from a journey under Schedule 7, it's a law. You don't have a right to silence. You cannot. If you committed a crime or a murder or even an act of terrorism, as a free man, you have the right. You I think you call it the Fifth Amendment. Here we have the right to silence, except for when you're getting stopped at an airport, even though you're not suspected of a crime. You're not suspected of a crime.
You haven't entered the country yet, and things like this.
And this disproportionately only applies to Muslims. Especially here in the West.
I mean, I always laugh at them and say, "Oh, you were chosen, selected, this and that." But now, the people at the airports know me so well. It's kind of like, "Oh, come on, let's just go through 2 hours, 3 hours." But it's alhamdulillah. I always say to myself, "Look, there's a day I won't be in this. There'll be a line that I won't be in, and you will be in." and I just leave it at that. And because we got a lot more to do and a lot more work to do. So, Sheikh,
Subhanallah.
may Allah protect and preserve you and your family, Sheikh. Now, what happens? So you come out of Bosnia, then you go back.
So I come out to Bosnia. I start. Okay, this becomes more of my connection to Islam. I become much more connected to Islam now as a result of this. Not because of going to the masjid or going on tabligh, or it's because of this practical connection to Muslims on the ground who really don't even know their faith. And I'm thinking they're getting killed, yet they don't know their faith. They're literally getting killed. Some of them don't even know La ilaha illallah. You know, they don't know it. I see even the during Ramadan, the pubs, the bars are filled. They really don't know. So I come back and I start to learn more about Islam. I had an Islamic bookstore where we started to, for my own education, for the education of my community, start to get books and distribute them and so forth. And then I had an opportunity to go to Afghanistan. Some friends of mine had come back from there, and they said that there's an opportunity to build a school.
Let me before you go there, Sheikh. Ho. So you said friends of mine. Sheikh, how did your friends affect you? You know, what kind of friends did you have? That and you can some friends.
So people who are working in different, Afghans, of course, who are coming back and forth. I live in an area where there's a huge Birmingham is about 40% Muslim. It's a massive Muslim population here. Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Yemenis, Somalis, Afghans, massive population, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, I mean, those kind of friends, there's tons of them. The opportunity to build not just to build a school, but to help to run that school, to set up its curriculum, to get playground equipment, to help to appoint teachers, all of that stuff, to be involved in this. So it was exciting. And the other thing was that because there was going to be both a boys and a girls school. So Madrasat Khadija bint Khuwailid for girls and Madrasat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq for boys. And this was important because the talk had already come out that the Taliban are not allowing female education, which is something that still is being discussed, right?
Yeah.
But to be involved in a project...
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, to be involved in a project where they would allow female education if Muslims help to govern the syllabus, we never found any opposition from them.
Yeah, that's seems to be the case still. I mean, they are. I mean, what? Well, anyway, that's a conversation we can have. But so
sure.
Then after that, so you went to Afghanistan, and how many years were you in Afghanistan? I mean, how much? And before this whole 9/11 thing happened.
I'd been there for almost, about a year or so. And by the
time, you stayed there for the year.
Yeah. And
it's not an easy place to be, Sheikh.
It's not, but it's your mindset. It's true. You're right. It's true. I mean, when the bombing happened, I left from Kabul and I went to a different area in the villages where my house was made of mud and straw, as you've seen those places, and I lived in that for about 4 months, I think 3-4 months, and because I
still have a problem going to the bathroom. In those mountains, sometimes you just gotta go. There's a thing. That's the bathroom.
Yeah, well, that
took time to learn.
Al-Khala is a place that's like just literally open, right?
Yeah.
So you go back to nature. You literally go back to nature. So as somebody with a car in the compound where I lived in, everybody else didn't, or a lot of people didn't have a car. So I'd find myself driving, taking huge, those bushkas, they call them, for barrels for water. And I'd fill not just mine, but all everybody else's, and we'd have to stand there pumping the water for each person. Otherwise, you can see these little children and so forth walking miles with a small thing that they can't carry on their shoulder. So alhamdulillah, that was a blessing for me to be able to be part of that. But it was, no doubt, it's tough, but there's a beautiful toughness about that. There's a simplicity of living in this place, even with your children. My children were all there.
How long your children? Do they remember Afghanistan? I'm sure they.
Yeah, my eldest daughter. The other ones don't remember so much, but my eldest daughter, she, how children look back at something with a, with a childish nostalgia. Yeah. is, wow, that was beautiful. The freedom. There's a sense of freedom you have in these places.
Yes.
Of
SubhanAllah, the people won't
literally
understand.
running
Only
free.
those who are there, Sheikh.
Yeah, running free.
Yes.
Yeah, of running free for children, especially just running free. It's a different type of experience.
So now, 3 years, the bombing start. Then we ended where they come and they grab you, put you in the car, and then what happened?
So then after this, they took me to a holding cell in Islamabad where they've got different people. Now it was really interesting because why are they picking me up? That's a question, right? That's
Yes.
really why are they going for me? It's obvious because two reasons. One is that the British intelligence had come to my house a couple of years before, a year before I'd gone to Afghanistan. In the case of an individual who'd written to me, said he's been tortured, forced to sign confessions. They came to me about him. And he'd asked me to get him an international lawyer, which I tried. But by that time, he'd been sent to another place. So this was all before the war on terrorism. But British intelligence now have come to me about this. Now listen to this, Sheikh Mohammed. This is very important. The same British intelligence guy who comes to my house after Fajr in the morning with his two other people, he sits in my house, I offer him tea. You know, the next time I see him, the next time I see this guy, Andrew, is in Kandahar prison with my hands tied behind my back, on my knees with a hood over my head that's just been lifted and a shotgun pointed to my head, and Andrew sitting right in front of me. Andrew from British intelligence. So Andrew is there all the way. And in the end of it, man, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the end of it, when I came back, I took a case against the British government with several others. And I named Andrew. I described him. Eye color, hair color, height, everything, as I'm describing a criminal. Because even though this is part of the government, I'm reporting it to the police. I'm taking a civil case against them and so forth. I never let them go. And alhamdulillah, in the end, after several years, we did win a case against them, but it was, in the end, you know that you can't do anything against the government. Nothing's going to happen to them. They just say we've learned lessons, we'll move on, we'll do something else, pay a little bit of compensation, and that's it. But to tell you, that was one reason. The other reason, and this was the words of Donald Rumsfeld. He said airplanes are flying over Afghanistan and dropping leaflets like, listen to this, snowflakes in December in Chicago. That's what he said. You could even do a search for this. Snowflakes in December in Chicago. These leaflets are falling like snowflakes, and each leaflet on it offers a bounty of $5,000 for each person that you hand over. And that's what was the greatest incentive to hand over people to the Americans. Money. Not evidence, not proof, money.
Money.
And that's where Chicago actually comes into the story because of that.
Yeah, the snowflakes, Sheikh. There is a connotation about snowflakes here, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, if you do a search on that, you'll find there's actually articles written on snowflakes in December in Chicago.
So Sheikh, about this money things, Sheikh, I mean, Afghanis, how did you find them? How did you find the people to be?
There's this, some people have this saying, and I don't think it's a right saying about any people, but Afghanis are a very proud people, very strong people, and history shows that they are one after the other. They will defeat any empire that comes to them. They will just play the long game, but they're also poor. Yeah, they've been impoverished by war. It's the land has a lot of minerals, but unfortunately, again, the infighting between the groups that existed in the past. That's one of the reasons why the Taliban came in the beginning, because of the infighting and because of the lawlessness. So unfortunately, in that environment, somebody might say, "Oh, this is Afghans. They do that. They sell people." It's not natural for them to do that. They did it because of poverty and fear. And those two things, despite all of that, they still fought back. In the end, they still did that. But there's no doubt, in the early days, that's what was going on. And it wasn't just, to be honest with you, it's not, I think the Pakistanis were worse.
Yeah, of course.
They
I mean,
sold a
most of
lot
the
more than
people
the
who, I mean, they were
yeah,
dropping bombs. They were allowing the bases. Over 100,000 strikes in Afghanistan from
yeah,
Pakistan. Till
exactly,
today, they are paying the
exactly,
price. And now, Allah knows what will happen with the
yeah,
TTP situation. But
exactly, exactly.
this is the so Sheikh now the when I went to Kabul, still I find people of Kabul to be different than the other provinces in many ways. I mean, did you find
Mm.
that to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was associating with lots of different people from all over the world, from Uzbeks, Arabs, lots of
Tajiks and
different
everything.
Iraqis, so I was, and of course the Pashtuns, they're quite different to the people, let's say, is known as the Farsi Bans or the Farsi
Mm,
speakers and so forth. And then the Tajiks and Uzbeks and so on. There's a big mix of different
yeah,
people, as you know, it's a melting pot.
yeah,
Um, and everybody's not the same. Everybody doesn't view you the same. There's a lot of people from the Hazara, for example, who saw some of us, looked at us with suspicion because of their historical relationship with some of the groups. But when you sit and talk to them,
they're
they're very
different.
good. Yeah, they're very good though. What I mean is, when you sit and talk to them, have
Yeah,
conversation with them,
yeah,
you can
yeah.
do that. The problem is that when people are divided on these lines of ethnicity, that of course is not from our deen to begin with, but unfortunately it separates us. And I think that happens everywhere. Um, but you can see now, for example, I know that Taliban have attempted to talk to those very people, who some accuse them of being involved in massacring them. But there has to be a point at which the violence, the hatred stops, and the dialogue begins between Muslims. And I think um, that wasn't happening enough. When I was there, 2 days before 9/11, Ahmed Shah Massoud was killed, right, by
Mm,
by Al Qaeda attack, and that he's a national figure, whether
yeah,
you
yeah, of
dislike him
course.
or not.
Yeah,
He's a national figure, and he's sacrificed and he struggled and he did all sorts of things,
yeah.
that most people couldn't do.
Until today, he's like,
And
I mean,
to this day, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and
You go to
he
homes
was
of people, you see his
greatly
pictures. This,
respected.
oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
greatly respected by even by people like Abdullah Azzam and others who spoke about him. So uh, when that happened, it increased the hatred between the groups, and
Mm,
lots of brutality happened. And I think getting rid of that is going to take some time.
yeah, yeah. That hasn't having effect till today. Sheikh, so here's the thing. You said, subhanAllah, look, you being from UK, how much did, and knowing that Islam is not about nationalism and really inculcating, really making that as part you as the only thing that defines you is Islam and Muslim. How much did
You know,
role that play the role in your personality and that giving you the ability to work with anyone as long as they said La ilaha illallah?
Subhanallah, I maybe, this is against Allah's blessing. It's only in adversity can you really understand the true nature of things sometimes. I I told you I was fighting skinheads when we were growing up and whatever. Um, and at that time, they would attack everybody, black, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, doesn't matter. But as time went on, those very same neo Nazis now only target Muslims. They don't just target Muslims, but they say that it's easier for them to talk against Islam as an ideology than any other ideology, right? It's so one thing I learned here, and I learned, because the majority of people here are from, the Indo-Pak subcontinent. I thought Islam must be bigger than this. How do I even communicate with the rest of the Muslim world? What do I do? One key thing for me was the Arabic language.
Mm,
Key, absolutely key. For me to understand the Quran and the Sunnah, most importantly, and then to be able to communicate with people from the world of Islam,
mm,
the lingua franca. This is the language that should have been spoken from Indonesia to Morocco.
yes.
And if that could happen, that could unite us too. So that I determined myself that I'm going to learn Arabic, and I
Mm,
did, alhamdulillah, by Allah's grace.
mashallah,
And
tabarakallah.
I was able to communicate and open my doors to people who normally I couldn't speak to. Um, and then I said, in addition to that, as I said, the other parts of the Muslim world, it just kept opening and opening and opening till I realized that Islam really is colorblind.
Mm,
It's as a religion, it's supposed to be that way. One of the greatest influences on me as a young man was Malcolm X,
mm.
massive influence.
Rahmatullah alayha.
And reading his book and his journey, again, this is coming from America, totally
Mm,
separated to my experience. Yet
subhanallah.
I'm seeing this guy and he becomes
And you know
comes
what's
not just to
crazy
Islam, but
about this, brother? There's very few people amongst the Muslim youth today that know Malcolm X in the United States. If you mention Malcolm X,
I find that
probably
I find that shocking.
17, 13, 14-year-olds will not know who that is.
Yeah,
What
that's
a,
shocking.
subhanAllah.
It's shocking because he's one of the
Especially amongst the
greatest.
Muslims, even.
Wow. Yeah,
Blacks,
that's
African Americans, they know. But Muslims,
of course.
youth,
Yeah, yeah.
no idea. No idea. Their
It's so
world is
important.
a whole different world, Sheikh.
It's so important. I read his autobiography, I think 3 times.
Mm.
I even came across it in Bagram, in the prison.
Huh.
An American soldier was reading it. An American soldier was reading it.
Wow.
And
That.
by the time he finished reading that, and his and my conversations were so different. His attitude to the U.S. military was so different. And I remember once he was walking with it, and another guy said to him, a guy from, I think, Kentucky or Texas unit, he says, "What are you reading that terrorist book for?"
Oof. Oh.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So it's this is it. This is it. This was for me Islam, it transcends everything. And that was the beauty. That was the beauty. I went to a Jewish school. Judaism doesn't transcend everything. It's very specific. It's very, you've got to be a Jew. You've got to be born through your lineage of your mother, and that's it. It's the closed group. Hinduism, it isn't open to everybody, and you couldn't even open it to everybody if you wanted to, because the belief system is so complicated and confusing that the intellect just cannot accept it. Christianity would have been. But again, Christianity, you can see this from the churches here, let alone in America, that if you're a Christian, you go to a black Christian church. If you're Chinese or Korean, you go to a Korean church. If you're with Islam, the masajid are filled. And in Guantanamo, I'll explain that to you later, but in the cells where we were in, if the guy's at the front cell, whoever he is, whether he's a young kid from 14 years old from the country of Nigeria, or whether he's a 85-year-old Sri Lankan, he's going to lead the prayer and everybody's going to say Ameen behind him. And that's the beauty of Islam, in the same language. No other religion is doing that. No other religion is doing that.
SubhanAllah, Sheikh, the amount of topics I'm thinking in my head to have a conversation with you on now. I mean, this issue of Malcolm X and Rahmatullah and Bagram. So did you ever have conversations with this man saying, what are you reading? And does it not, does it not affect what you are seeing? I mean,
so my brother, one of the things, right, is that to my knowledge, I mean, I was only there for 3 years, so this is my knowledge.
Only 3 years, huh?
Fact,
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
I know for a fact that
SubhanAllah. Go on.
4 American soldiers took the Shahada.
Allahu
in either in or after Guantanamo. That includes 2 sisters, one Hispanic, one black, and 2 brothers, both white. That's the ones that I'm aware of.
Are you in contact with them? You are in contact with them? You are in touch with them? Really?
Yes, I am.
And they're here in the US?
Yeah. There's one in Arizona. There's one in what is it?
Man, it would be very interesting to have them on the show.
Oregon? Yeah, of course. I mean, one in I'm trying to remember is Oregon. One in Oregon. Then there's a sister also in New Mexico. Yeah. And even there's some who didn't become Muslims, but they came to visit me in my house. They speak against Guantanamo.
In England?
They didn't become Muslim. Yeah, in England. Yeah, they've come. In fact, there was one. His name's Al. He's from Rhode Island. He came here, and we met together, and funny guy. We walked together in the streets where there's just Muslims. We went to have, to go and eat together, and we go to pay the bill. Somebody's already paid it, right? And this does happen. It's not like it doesn't happen. It does happen, but this happens specifically because of him. And this is another part of our deen, our religion, is that America will never invite me, never, that I can imagine, right? But we will invite Americans, even those who held us and were involved in separating us from our families, because our deen teaches us, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamin lillahi shuhada bil qist. Or you believe, stand up as just for Allah, ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. Don't allow your animosity and hatred of the people to cause you to do them an injustice. These guys were decent to us in the cells. They treated us well. They reached out to us and they said, we want to come and see the real you in your house. They stayed in my home. Where this time I have the keys, not them. But I have the keys for the cell, not them, right? And they walked with me in these streets. And they were welcomed by my friends who could have looked at them and said, you know what, you're in a... They could have said all of that. Not a single one of them did. Not a single one of them. And that's also part of our message of Islam, is that in the end, it's not about me. It's about this deen. And this deen will reach every nook and cranny of this world.
Ya Rabbi.
وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ.
So, Sheikh, subhanallah, then, so you were there 3 years, and then what happens in these 3 years? You psychologically, you as a human being, as
Yeah.
Muslim,
So, I mean,
as Moazzam Begg.
so as I said,
Yani, did
as
you
I
ever
said, they
question?
took
Let me. Did you ever question, like, what did I do, man? 3 years now. What am I? Did that ever happen when you're
Yeah.
alone in a cell and like, yo, man? I mean,
Many
what did I
times.
just?
Many times, especially because if I was just a single man, maybe I would have dealt with it differently. My wife was pregnant with my fourth child when they took me into custody. I didn't see him until he's 3 years old. First time I saw him when he's 3 years old.
Subhanallah.
And my other children, I wasn't going to see them. They were all, from 4 to 6 to 8, that ages, those ages. But then, as I said, subhanallah, I say that. And then there are friends I know who've never met their son. Never.
Allah.
Because they're in Guantanamo. One of them, he's still in Guantanamo. He's never met his son. Never seen him. My other friend, Shakir, he's from Medina. He's from Medina. He's a Madani. We lived together in the same house in Afghanistan. He had the top floor. I had the bottom floor. He didn't have British nationality.
Subhanallah.
And as a result of that, he never came back home. He stayed another 11 years after me. His wife and children are all British, all in the UK, including his younger son, Faris, who Shakir never saw him until he's 15 years old.
This is the
Our
brother
sons
with
were born
glasses and the one who they did something to his eyes. Is this the brother Shakir?
No, that's a different brother. That's a different brother. Yeah. So this Shakir, if you see him, you do a search on him. He's really good looking brother, long hair, long beard. Funny guy. But look what they did to him. His 4 children, all grown adults when he comes out from Guantanamo. What's the charge against him? Not a single charge, not one charge against him. Did he ever go to court? No. Any trial? No. So, you asked me, Elon, what's the charges? You don't have to have charges to be in Guantanamo. There is no charge. There's no legal process. They keep you there as long as they can and as they want to. And nobody can do anything about it.
Sheikh, is this whole idea of rule of law, is this all a sham? I mean, the Western countries boast so much about this stuff and human rights and
even in Guantanamo, they've tried to set up something called the military commissions, where they've tried to charge some people with crimes. There are a handful of people. After 20 years, they still haven't managed to convict one person for those charges. 20 years. And who's interrogated them? Not Pakistani intelligence, or it's the CIA, FBI, military intelligence, the most advanced law enforcement and intelligence agencies in the world. And you still couldn't convict them. So
when you say advanced, obviously, did you ever see a difference between the intelligence people in Pakistan and how these guys were in the treatment, at least, or the way they would discuss things?
Yeah, very much so. Very, very much so. I saw distrust between the Pakistanis and the Americans. I saw mistrust and rivalry between the FBI and the CIA. I saw them looking down on the British. But in the end, they were all cooperating together. If I tell you, Sheikh Mohammed, that even Chinese intelligence came to Guantanamo to interrogate the East Turkestani Uyghur brothers. I'm not joking. There were 22 Uyghurs in Guantanamo, and they were allowed to be interrogated by the Americans. Libyan intelligence came, Syrian intelligence came, Egyptian intelligence came. Everybody, every abuser and tyrant, all took part, because now America was hurt so bad they didn't care who they work with. And most people won't even be able to comprehend this, especially now if you think of the relation between China and America. You couldn't even imagine this. Russian intelligence came. The Russians came. So in this madness, the lives of the brothers meant nothing. It really meant nothing at all. The rights of the brothers meant nothing. And they may talk about human rights and the rule of law and so forth, but all they said is national security. National security, every country, whether it's the most despicable one like Syria or whichever one that does the most worst human rights abuses, or Britain or America, when they cite national security, everything goes.
Sheikh, what happened to the woman? What happened to sisters? What happened to, I mean, so what happened to your family once they took you? They came back to UK or did they stay in Pakistan? And what in general happens to sisters who are who are in
Um,
this situation, especially let's say
so
they were in Afghanistan
yeah,
and others?
the vast majority of them went back home and were
Mm,
allowed to go back home. Vast majority,
mm,
including my wife. Eventually, she went. She waited for a while. She had instructed a lawyer, a Pakistani lawyer, to issue a habeas
purpose.
proceedings
Mm,
in Pakistan to have me presented to the court, and they were threatened. The court was threatened uh, by the government. The government was threatened by the court, that if you don't bring this man to the court, you're going to be in breach of the law. And they said, "So, well, sorry, we can't bring him now because the Americans have got him." How
mm.
did you hand him to the Americans? Just gave them any treaties, any agreements? No. So anyway, after all of that,
I mean, just slave mentality. We're the slaves. The Americans
yeah,
are the
absolutely, yeah,
masters. That's it.
exactly.
Okay.
And so after that, she tried her best and then just went back home, which was the best thing and the safest thing for us to do. Alhamdulillah, she was
Yeah, yeah,
okay. There was some support. There was community here to some extent, although I think at that time people may not remember. The younger ones won't remember, but the older ones will. Is that there was so much fear that friends and family of yesterday were nowhere to be seen or heard, and they had run for cover.
Let me ask you.
And
Hold
in
on,
there,
Sheikh. Hold on, Sheikh. So now here's the thing. That's God. That's another topic. But look, Sheikh. Now hypocrisy comes out. Is that what you're saying? Meaning the
I think,
people that you think you can trust, the people
yeah,
that talk so much, يعني لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون يعني كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. All of
yeah.
this, and your wife is the one handling all of this in many ways. How important is it, Sheikh, for brothers like you, brothers who are involved in work, serious work, that their wives? I mean, how important of the role did your wife play in all of it?
So alhamdulillah, my wife played the role in that she looked after my children and took care of them and made sure my memory was kept alive, with them, trying to write. Even the letter writing was very difficult. You send a letter through the Red Cross, it gets there 6 months later, and by the time I see it, it's been heavily blacked out, and the only thing I can read from my daughter that she's written, she's 6 years old, is "I love you, Dad." Everything else has been blacked out by the American census. Nonetheless, she tried her best. My father, may Allah have mercy upon him,
I mean,
he became a lion in this time.
I
He
mean,
became a lion in this time. He started to
Allah.
campaign, go on television every day. He had the media at his house, and he wasn't afraid at all. He even came to the US,
Are your
and he
parents
stood
like you,
outside.
Sheikh? Your parents in general like you?
My father taught me to be like me. My father was, he taught me to. I am like I try to be, or at least emulate how he was, in that he believed very, very strongly, and he inculcated me from a young age, very, very early. And he taught me that. And when he saw this with his own son, I saw him in action. And to this day, people remember him because for 3 years non-stop, he gave up everything and he traveled everywhere around the country, meeting with politicians, going on the media. As I said, he even turned up outside White House, literally challenging Bush to come out. If my son's committed a crime, take him to court. If not, then he's not the criminal, you are. He'd speak like this. And, this was, I didn't know about any of this. I mean, I have no access to any of this news at all. One day, one soldier, he brought me some information in Guantanamo. He said, look, here. He said, I did a search in your name. He said, there's thousands of pages about you.
Oof.
I said, how? He said, yeah, because the American interrogators have told me everybody's forgotten about you. Nobody wants to know you. They're all afraid. Your father, your family, your friends, everybody. When you go back home, the world has changed. So they tried to frighten me in this way, right? And it did to some degree, but not to the extent that because there was, there were lots of people who, yes, they don't even want to shake your hand because they're too afraid to see you in the street. But my father had become a new character. All of a sudden, he'd become this, like everybody knew him. He was on the news every day. And he, alhamdulillah, helped me to walk into the path that I did when I came back.
You come back, and then when did you become part of Cage?
Literally almost immediately. I mean, just about a year afterwards, I wrote a book when I came out, and then straight after that, I joined Cage. And the reason why I joined Cage at that time was called Cage Prisoners, is because there were so many prisoners I didn't know anything about. I'd seen them, I'd heard their voices. Sometimes I couldn't see their faces because we're just shouting across each other over the walls or so forth. So I came, and Cage Prisoners at that time had the entire listing, interviews with family members or released prisoners or lawyers, and resources. And I thought to myself, I'd always told myself that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows me, I will talk about this subject in ways that nobody else will be able to. Because they need, unfortunately, in the English-speaking world, you need somebody who knows how this language and who can articulate himself and present himself. And so that I knew that's going to be my calling now. And I saw 2 murders, brother. I saw 2 prisoners murdered in Bagram, killed by the American soldiers.
How? Yes, I read that, Sheikh. How? I mean, you were there, present while this was happening. Did you know them? Did you see the killing? How?
So there's 2. One is a prisoner. He tried to escape from the cell.
And how old were they? If you remember,
they were in their 20s, 30s, about that age. So the first one is they're both Afghanis. Remember, imagine you're murdered in your own country by an occupying force. That's in the end, that's what it is. And the prisoner we were held in, right, was actually a warehouse, a giant warehouse. It had been built by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had built this when they occupied Afghanistan.
This was
now the American
Bagram. This is in a few minutes from Kabul.
Yeah,
I saw it. Yes, about
40 minutes or so. Yeah.
I saw it, but inshallah, when you go back, I heard you were planning. Inshallah, when you do, you will go back and visit. That's one of the things I want to see. That's a historical.
I intend to go. Well, for me, Bagram is the scene of a murder. It's a murder scene. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why I want to go back, because it's not an unsolved murder. The murder is solved. We know who did it exactly, but there's not been any justice for it.
So they actually had people in cages, like cages.
Yes.
Literally, people were laying in cages like chicken and animals.
So there were different size cages, as it were. I was in Bagram at the time when I was there. There were 6 cages on the first floor, on the ground floor, and in each cage that was divided, they used concertina, a razor wire, coils of razor wire to divide us between all, so we could see through it. In my cell, at any given time, I was there for 1 year. There was about 10, and there's 10 in each cell. So at the back, there was a barrel.
Cell.
Huh. Yeah, about 10, yeah. At the back was a barrel. They cut the barrel in half to use as a toilet. You have to be seen all the time, even if you're in the toilet. So you can use a blanket to cover your middle part, but you have to be seen. And that was like for 1 year. I drank 1 small bottle of water a day, and there was no wudu facility. So for 1 year, I made tayammum. 1 year, tayammum. In Bagram, we weren't allowed to talk. You couldn't speak. If you spoke, if you got up, if you walked, they took you to the front of the cell. They stormed in, tied your hands above your head to the top of the door, the cage, and with shackles, and put a hood over your head and leave you there suspended for hours, sometimes days. This is the way I saw. So there's one prisoner, he tried to get out from the back where the toilet was. He escaped. They caught him and they beat him to death. And I saw them carrying his body in front of me. I know, to this day, I know the names of the soldiers who did it. I know those soldiers because they used to talk to me. As an English speaker, I was rare. The other person they killed was in February 2003. His name was Dilawar. He was a taxi driver. They tied him to the top of the cage like this and left him there for hours. And then when his body slumped like this, and imagine that means if your body's slumped, it's the chains are cutting into your wrists and you're still not moving. That means there's something wrong.
No.
So they come and open the door and they start to punch him in his ribs to see if he's pretending. And then they took him upstairs and they killed him. How do I know, Sheikh? How do I know they killed him? I know because a year later, I'm in solitary confinement in Guantanamo. 2 American interrogators come along and they show me photographs of Dilawar and his body. They confirm to me that he's dead. And they asked me, could I point out the soldiers who were there on duty that night? So I pointed out this guy, this guy, this girl, this guy. And then they said the most bizarre thing, would you be prepared to be a witness in a case, a witness for the prosecution in a case against these guys? I said, sure, I would be. How are you going to take me in chains? Are you going to drag me? How are you going to take me? I'm not even charged with a crime. You're going to have to go to court because you're holding me without charge. You're committing a crime. So it was just a joke. And in the end, the murderers of this taxi drivers, they got dishonorable discharges and demotions, and that was it. That was it.
Sheikh, who's going to write this history of the Muslims? Who's going to write this oppression that has taken place again?
I want to tell you something more. You know, sorry, one more thing. Dilawar, the taxi driver, you know why they killed him? This is the shocking part. He was still alive when they took him upstairs. When they were punching him, he was still alive. They tied him again, and they kicked him on his leg. That's in the US military, it's known as a peroneal strike, which is like a Thai boxing style kick to the top of the leg, right? And they do that to prisoners who, they kicked him on that leg 100 times. You know why? Because every time they kicked him, he said Allah, Allah, and they found it amusing.
Ahadun ahad ya Sheikh, ahadun ahad.
Yeah, that's it.
Allahu
Every time
Akbar.
they kicked him, he said Allah, Allah, and he said Allah, Allah maybe 200 times that night before he died. And that's all in the autopsy report.
Sheikh, you know, it seems that they keep finding Bilals, ya Sheikh.
Ya Rabbil Alameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. What can you say? Subhanallah. What can you say? So in the end, you know, what this reminds us of is, in the end, if we had forgotten, wal akhiratu khayrun wa abqa. In the end, don't see this dunya as something that you're going to be in forever. The akhirah is our goal, and it is that is eternal, and it is that book we should aim for. Everything else is just, it's kullu man alayha fan wa yabqa wajhu rabbika dhil jalali wal ikram. You know, everything's going to go. Just the manner in which we go. The manner in which we go is, you know, what better manner could be than that?
Why did they put you in solitary confinement, Sheikh?
3 reasons.
I can see why, but I can see why.
3 reasons. Because I told them, I've seen you people murder. I've seen you murder people in cold blood. I'm never going to forget it, and I'm never going to let it go. That's one.
Were you not scared, Sheikh, that they will do the same thing to you?
Can I do it? By this time, I'd been separated from everything. I was terrified. I mean, the terror had gone now. The years of terror were in the first few months. You know, that they threatened to send me to Syria, threatened to send me to Egypt. In one interrogation, wallahi, I'm not joking, 2 FBI guys sitting on one side, CIA guys sitting in the middle. FBI's asking questions non-stop, one after the other, after the other, after the other. The CIA guy is sitting, burning blue eyes, a gun in his hand. He's not saying a word. He doesn't blink, not even once in 1 hour. He doesn't blink once. When the FBI finished their interrogation, they walk out. He looks at me and he says, Moazzam Begg? That.
Wow.
I don't know what that meant. And then he says, I'm sending you to Egypt. Anybody from the Muslim
Mm.
world knows that Egypt is like that's the heart of torture and terror and abuse.
Yeah.
And I'd met prisoners who'd been sent to Egypt.
Ya Allah. Mm.
So, you know, I think maybe because I was a British citizen, there's something they couldn't go beyond. But, you know,
Mm.
I didn't care anymore by that point. In the beginning, I was terrified, but by this time, it was just like, you know, they subjected me to the sounds of a woman screaming in the next cell. They made me believe it's my wife. They waved my children's pictures in front of me. Said, "Where do you think they are now? Where this woman's screaming? Where do you think your kids are now?" I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what had happened to them. So they're making me believe all this kind of psychological torture. But you know, alhamdulillah, it passed. I see where's the blessing in all of this. I memorized Surah Al Baqarah in Bagram. For me, that was a big thing because I don't come from a line of traditional study or whatever. I just learned myself. I didn't have anybody to teach me. I just learned myself. And often for learning Surah Al Baqarah, they take me to the front of cell and tie my hands up because, oh, you're talking or you're raising your voice. So these little things for me were great victories.
Sheikh, impact of the Quran. I mean, why don't we see that in, I asked you about this before our conversation about the ulama, and I said, why is it that we, wherever where there's so many ulama, we actually find that the activities slow down. We actually,
Yeah.
in some ways, unfortunately, we dumb down. Why is that, Sheikh? And then you find Sayyid Qutub's and your likes memorizing Quran in jail.
You know, brother, subhanallah, didn't the Prophet ﷺ say, يوشك أن تدع عليكم كما تدع يوشك الأمم أن تدع عليكم كما تدع الأكلة إلى قصعتها. This is that famous hadith. This is the time we're living in. That the nations will come and rip you apart into pieces. The Sahaba ask, أمن قلة نحن يومئذ يا رسول الله. Are we few in number? No, لكنكم كالغثاء السيل. You are like the filth of the floodwater. And in the end, it comes back down to the very thing that we mentioned earlier on, which is, why are we like this? Why are we like this? Not numbers. We are massive. Our numbers count for nothing. Our numbers are hujjatun alayna. And it's because of the end of the hadith, hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut. Hubbud dunya. We have been taken over by this. You know that dua we make in Ramadan all the time. Allahumma la taj'al ad-dunya akbaru hammina wa la mablagha ilmina wa la ila an-nari masirana. We say it, but what does it mean? The dunya is the most important thing to us. We are working for the dunya. All of us are. And I think we fool ourselves with the trappings of what Islam looks like, the appearances and the talk and what it sounds like. Imagine at the time of the Tabi'een, even at the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he's a Nabi al-Ummi, the unlettered prophet. Who had a Quran in their house? Who had Sahih al-Bukhari in their house? Who had the Siyah al-Sitta in their house? For generations, only the ulama. That's it. Nobody else, just the ulama. Today, everybody's an alim. Everybody has the access to being an alim. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an auditorium, an audience through social media. When Allah says, هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, those who know are equal to those who don't know. The station of the maqam of the ulama used to be one of they learn, they act, because greater than the ulama are the Sahaba. The Sahaba are greater than the ulama of the that followed. And they're the ones that we're supposed to follow before we follow even the ulama. The Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is even greater than them. Just think about how many hajjs and umrahs we go for. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went for one hajj and 28 ghazawat fi sabilillah. 28. Our balance is entirely messed up. Entirely. Forget about going for ghazawat. The ulama that we have today, illa man rahima rabbak, have become just podiums to regurgitate same old stories again and again, which doesn't inspire. I mean, inspire to be strong, inspire to be that person who's not afraid of the akhirah, who's not afraid of death. We don't have people who are like that. People are very afraid of death for the wrong reason, not because they're afraid to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but because they're afraid that this life will end and there is no other life. That's the level at which we've sunk, I think. And our ulama, had they been worth what the ulama of the past were, they would have led us in this thought. And I don't think the majority do, unfortunately.
They would have led us. These are very. Ya Sheikh, this has to. Allah, 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 Ya Sheikh. Allah, Allah. So, you have left me. I don't have.
Let me just tell you a little thing then. Let me just tell you something, okay, to ponder about. People often ask me, did the Americans let you pray? I said, that's a really strange question. I find that an odd question for a Muslim. What do you mean, let you pray? How does that even happen? So let me explain how my first salah in US custody was. The Pakistanis hand me over to the Americans. This is in Islamabad, okay? And they take my shoes off, they take my belt off, they've tied my hands behind my back, they put a hood over my head, and they put me into the ruku position. And they're pushing me with their arms, are twisting my arms behind me like this. Excruciating pain. Taking me onto this cargo aircraft. I hear the sounds of screaming, other prisoners, soldiers cursing in Arabic. They've learned new words, Arabic, Urdu, Pashto, whatever. Cursing, it sounds funny, but scary. Dogs barking, roar of the engines, okay? He forces me down onto the ground and he puts a strap across my legs, so I'm sitting with my legs facing forward. Next to me, I can't see anything on either side, but I hear a brother, Salaam alaikum. I say, wa alaikum assalam. Akhi, anta min ayn? Ana Pakistani.
Oh, you knew Arabic already at this time, خلاص.
Yeah.
MashaAllah, tabarak.
And it says, Ana Libi, I'm a Libyan. Then what he says next, my brother, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sent this brother to remind me, because I'd forgotten. I'm telling you, I'm
Salah, ya
terrified.
Sheikh.
He says, Akhi, hal sallayta salat al-maghrib.
Allah.
Hal sallayta salat al-maghrib, ya salam. I'm thinking, I don't know about Dhuhr, Asr, and I'm gone. I think I'm going to die. They put a hood over my head. He says,
هذا عالم شيخي, هذا عالم.
He says, أخي أظن وقت الصلاة قد دخل. I said, how would you know? How would you know that the time for prayers has entered? How would you even know that? But that's what's on his mind. My mind is, I'm thinking life or death. He's thinking as-salatu. Inna salata kan al-mu'minina kitab al-mawquta. That's what he's thinking. And then I said, أخي أنت على اليسار. You're on the left. فصلي بنا. صلي بنا. So look at this. Now look at this, brother. As the soldiers have obviously heard that these guys are talking. Kalam mamnu. Talking is, you can't talk. So as I say to him, Akhi anta al yasar salli bina, an American soldier comes in, he puts a knife to my throat.
Yeah.
He said, if you speak again, MF, I'll slit your throat. At this point, the brother says, Allahu Akbar. And he begins Al-Fatiha. Khalas, I'm now in a straight state of salah. What better way to die could there be while you're praying? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah haqqa tuqati wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. What better state could there be? And I tried to think who was that Libyan brother, and to this day I've not been able to discover him, though I've been to Libya twice and met with brothers who were released from Guantanamo. I've not been able to find out who this guy was. I've searched around the world. I've known the majority of the brothers who were released, the Libyans, and as I said, I've been to Libya twice. Couldn't find him. So I don't know who he is.
You came back, and then when the Syrian situation started, you went back to Sweden. And what are you made
Yeah,
of,
this
man?
was
What are you made up of? Akhi? Give us some of that.
this is why I said I went to Libya, right? I went to Libya before I went to Syria. I went to Libya, went to Egypt, I went to Tunisia. This was during the Arab
After
Spring,
all of
Rabi
this,
al-Arabi.
oh,
After all
subhanallah.
of this. Or maybe because of all of this.
Uh,
Think about it this way. Maybe I wouldn't have gone to these countries, but I had met prisoners, my dear brother, from these countries. I had heard their stories. Some of them had said, please, Akhi, can you do something for our, relatives and so forth? I was talking to governments here to help them to bring in former Guantanamo prisoners who couldn't go to Libya. Libyans who couldn't go to Libya, Palestinians who couldn't go to Israel, or Palestine, sorry. Tunisians who couldn't go to Tunisia. Algerians who couldn't go to Algeria. So they had to be resettled into different countries in Western Europe and others.
yeah. Even I think
So
Brother
I
Mansour
was
now
going,
is in. Where is he?
yeah,
He's in.
Mansour's in Serbia. He's in Serbia,
he's Serbia.
of all places, right?
Yeah, they put him there.
So this was what was going on. The resettlements program to help find homes for these poor brothers. So as part of that, there's several Syrians in Guantanamo, several. And the US government, I know, and the British government was actually sending people to Syria. They were sending people to the Assad regime to be tortured. In fact, there's a case of 4 US Canadian citizens. All were sent via the US to Syria, where they were all tortured. Every single one of them has received an apology by Justin Trudeau, and every single one of them has received $10 million in compensation because of the role of their government in their own abuse and torture. So I was involved in this stuff. But when I got there, I saw people are busy doing other things, busy trying to defend themselves from the regime. So in attempting to assist a few of those, I was trying to send one of them a generator. I was arrested and I gave them some, ideas of how
Rest
to do
happened
press
where,
ups and
Sheikh?
stuff.
When you came back?
In the UK, yeah, in the UK, in the UK, and that's Britain's laws were all ridiculous. And again, so now I went to prison for an 8 months waiting trial. Not that I wasn't convicted.
Did all come back to you again? I mean,
No, alhamdulillah. This was so much. This was a walk in the park. This was a walk in the park, bro. This was actually siyaha. I actually kind of enjoyed it. It's like, oh, you know what? You get so many things.
Sijin al-Mu'min, Sheikhi, Sijin al-Mu'min.
You get visits, you get people. There's so many brothers you can talk to. I'm not in solitary confinement. I get phone calls. You get to read books. I read some amazing books. Some Tarikh al-Uthmaniyya in Arabic. I read it there. They had it there. Khulafa al-Uthmaniyya, and all these different things they had there. So alhamdulillah, it was 8 months.
Did your Arabic improve there?
Yes, in a sense, because part of the evidence, I was looking at the Twitter. I was reading the Twitter feeds of leaders of the Free Syrian Army. I was going through them every day. What are they saying? What are they saying? What are they saying? And because they were trying to say that I'm involved in helping them, then they're terrorists. I said, well, if they're terrorists, then why is the British government and the American government helping them? So I was deciphering all of this and saying, actually, they call themselves mujahideen. They say we are shuhada. Why is the Americans supporting these people then if they're terrorists? So I was going to break them apart, Sheikh. I mean, honestly, I was so prepared for court. I was very well prepared. And the day we're supposed to go to trial, they dropped the charge. So I know in America the system is a bit different, but here I was so upset.
Is that because they're worried that this might, because of the case law system they have, that this will become something for the others? Yes.
Jihad is not terrorism. Muslims defending themselves against oppression and occupation and torture and rape and murder is not terrorism. And especially because you support the Mujahideen when it suits you. You support them. You supported them in Syria, you supported them in Afghanistan against the Soviets, you supported them in Libya against Gaddafi. You do it. So why are you calling it terrorism when you know it's not? So all of this anyway, alhamdulillah, in the end I came out and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
What did your wife say this time, Sheikh? This one I have to know. Subhanallah, Sheikh. I mean, was your dad alive, Sheikh, at that time?
Yeah, he was, alhamdulillah. And my dad
Allah.
was the best yardstick of this, right? Because he's always worried. If I'm abroad, he's worried. When he was here, I was talking to him, he said, it's okay, it's all right. You'll be fine. I know you're going to walk through this. He wasn't even worried. He wasn't even worried. So alhamdulillah, there was a blessing from about that. Yeah.
SubhanAllah, Sheikh. It's almost 5 o'clock here. But this is, man, it went by so fast. Sheikh, promise me part 2 of this, please.
Inshallah.
Because there has to be maybe part 2 or something else. And make dua, I get to see you and actually hug you and sit there with, in the place where Allah loves, and we actually sit there and discuss how to build this ummah again. Please, dua with people, brothers like you are accepted, Shaheed. Keep us in your dua, and that Allah keeps us.
You too, brother. Inshallah, alhamdulillah. It's been a beautiful conversation. I hope we converse again, inshallah, in the future. And my salam to all the brothers and sisters of Chicago. And, it's not just the snowflakes of Chicago that are in our memories.
That's going to be a short. The snowflakes of Chicago. This is going to be, that's going to hurt though. A lot of people.
It's going to be, it's had a double meaning. It has a double meaning, doesn't it?
Subhanallah. All right, brother. Wallahi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and preserve you guys. And the likes of you.
I mean, all of us.
And those who are struggling like you and working like you. There's a lot that we need to still discuss and get to the meat of so much more, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect, preserve your family and reward them in ways they couldn't even imagine with the patience. I can't even imagine the patience and perseverance and sacrifices that they had to go through, whether your parents or wives or children. I can't even imagine that. That would be something that we'll have to discuss, because we need to know this shit. We need to know. We need to learn from our brothers who are our examples. Subhanallah. So with this, inshallah, brothers and sisters, wallah, again, jazakallah khair, Shaykh.
Allah barik fikum. Allah barik. Allah know.
And brothers and sisters, listen to this conversation with your parents, with your family, with your children, gather the brothers and sisters, your family around you. Brothers, gather the brothers around you and have say that this is a conversation we all need to listen to and realize what kind of people we are competing against, or who should we be looking up to and competing with for this Jannah. This is not going to be cheap, brothers. Jannah is not cheap. And what people are doing, this ummah, the sons and daughters of this ummah are doing, how hard they are working to protect themselves from the Jahannam that is also promised when we don't fulfill the rights and obligations. And again, as I always mention the ulama, and the only reason I mention the ulama is because ulama are responsible. Ulama are people who are supposed to lead us. Ulama are people who Allah mentioned, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. So fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the knowledge that you have been given, in the status that you have been given, that you lead this ummah from the struggles that it is struggling with. Again, brothers and sisters, jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. See you next Jummah, inshallah.
Sorry.
لا لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا